All right, so in this segment, we're going to talk about how animals learn how to eat and build foraging skills. So, the way that animals learn how to eat and how they instinctually know what feed stuff is going to be the best for them or is going to that they need to stay clear of is based on consequences. So, there's two types of defense systems. The first one is the skin defense system. So, for example, if an animal has some sort of touch and that touch actually causes pain, then the animal is going to avoid that stimulus again. So this could be like walking alongside a mesquite bush that has thorns on it. Okay, so if an animal walks alongside a mesquite bush, it's those thorns are going to rub along the side, probably cause some pain. Therefore, the animal will avoid it in the future. The second defense system is the gut defense system. And this is a little bit differently because it's based on the actual process of prehension, so eating. So, as an animal selects a plant to eat, that plant has a certain taste associated with it. As the animal and that taste is going to register in the brain, then that the vegetation associated with the plant is going to travel through the digestive system. And if the plant has a positive feedback on the digestive system, meaning that nausea is not called, it doesn't, or nausea is not caused, it doesn't inhibit digestion anyway, reduce severe populations of bacteria or fungi or protozoa, then that is going to be a positive response. And so the animal is going to develop a preference for that plant because the brain remembers what it tastes like. However, if an animal eats a plant that has an aversion associated with it on the digestive system, so it causes nausea, causes death to a certain bacterial cell line that throws the whole gut out of balance, etc., then that's going to be a negative response, and the animal is going to avoid that plant in the future because those gut experiences are being recorded and learned in the brain and associated with the way that that plant tasted. Okay, so this we also learn based on consequences. So some of the food that we actually like now, we didn't necessarily like in the past. So this could be like coffee is a really good example. Usually people that drink like black coffee for the first time find it really, really bitter and they avoid it. So it only is after you like sugar it up, um, you know, put a lot of milk in it, buy the fruit drinks at Starbucks for a long time, that you eventually can get to a point where you can drink black coffee. Okay, so again, this is similar to animals actually figuring out what they can eat and what they can't eat. And even with plants that initially cause some sort of aversion, if they eat enough of it and become immune to that aversion or that negative digestive feedback, it can actually change and to become a preference for it. And one example that we see with this in animals is consumption of sagebrush. All right, so our animals, we've been able to do some research to actually study this behavior, and we've actually also been able to condition certain aversions to animals. So, for example, mountain mahogany is pretty prolific throughout the sagebrush steppe, um, and but it also has some major terpenes associated with it and can kill animals very, very right or very quickly. So the um, what ends up happening is in order to try to get animals to not eat this plant, we can actually feed them mountain mahogany. They're going to get that taste in their system, and then we can dose them with lithium chloride, which causes nausea. and that will result in a negative digestive feedback, and the animals will avoid mountain mahogany. However, if we don't do that, then the ewes will actually eat mountain mahogany and have a positive digestive response. And as long as they don't eat too much of it, they won't die. So that was kind of the experimental design of this study, and what they ended up finding also was that when they dosed lambs with mountain mahogany, and then they dosed them with lithium or dosed one treatment group with lithium chloride, the intake or the number of bites of mountain mahogany dropped off significantly after day 3. And that's because during day 1 and 2, they had that negative association with mountain mahogany and the lithium chloride. However, the control animals actually increased their consumption of mountain mahogany because they didn't have that negative feedback associated with that eating experience. So again, I mentioned sagebrush a little bit earlier. Sagebrush is really interesting because it actually has terpenes associated with the leaves in the sagebrush plant. However, it's been shown that cattle and sheep can actually eat sagebrush up to a certain limit. So as long as they limit their intake, sagebrush is not going to cause a negative effect. Okay, so one of the ways that this was studied was by actually putting sagebrush into a ration at a various percentage. So 0%, 10, 20, and 30%. And you can see the amount of consumption on the animal's part, or the intake in terms of grams per day of kilogram of body weight, actually decreased really rapidly as the percentage of sagebrush in the ration went up. So these animals that were consuming the ration of 30% sagebrush leaf were not eating very much of it because the terpenes was too much for the system. So again, the animals are going to learn consequences and learn what to eat based on their gut defense system. So if they have a positive experience or a negative experience, means they're going to have a preference for the plant or an aversion to the plant respectively. So again, we can actually train this into our animals, and something that they don't necessarily like, they could actually learn to prefer over time if the right stimulus are applied. And so one example of the stimulus is was done by actually adding starch to a straw ration. So a straw is going to be the stalk part of the wheat plant, and there's not a whole lot of nutrition associated with it. There's a lot of lignin associated with the starch, so it's really, really coarse, not full of very much nutrition, and doesn't taste very well. However, you can actually condition animals to eat straw by feeding them or by supplementing them with starch once a day. And as long as you have that energy balance, then they'll actually end up eating quite a bit of straw because they have the energy to balance out what or all of that residual dry matter that is coming into the gut. Therefore, that is a positive digestive response to the animal. Okay, so if you only give the animal water in their pen and a bunch of straw to eat, that water doesn't have very much of a positive feedback. Therefore, those animals will avoid the straw. So one of the projects that was done early on in the 80s was by having 2 pens of lambs and having straw at both pens, and offering either water or starch in each one of those pens as well. So in the pens where starch was offered, as long as animals had access to the starch and was able to ingest some, they would actually consume more straw throughout the study, which was 33 days long, compared to the water. So we have to be a little bit careful with getting animals to eat certain types of feed, because we want to make sure that we don't cross that line where uh, eating a feedstuff will actually become toxic to the animal, but we can build up tolerance in animals as well. So we get so this is how one way that we figured out to get sheep to eat more sagebrush is by supplementing the ewes on rangeland. And as long as they're supplemented with a energy source and they have another choice of feed stuff to actually ingest, then they will eat more sagebrush since it's the predominant forage on the rangeland. And so we see that in both of our small ruminants. In sheep that were not supplemented with sagebrush, they tended to eat less total sagebrush leaves compared to animals that were supplemented in addition to having sagebrush available. Goats were pretty much the same way. All right, so we can also see that animals that are supplemented or have some sort of supplement on rangeland are going to eat quite a bit more sagebrush compared to animals that are not supplemented. So this leads to the concept of creating designer livestock, which kind of sounds like a boxed product, but it's actually a really kind of a cool concept that may help us better manage rangeland. So if we can select animals that are naturally going to have or naturally possess a desired characteristic, like specifically from a digestive standpoint, then we could actually breed more of them if we know we have a long-term permit where there's a forage in question that needs to be ate and maintained as part of the ecosystem. So if we can breed more animals with these abilities, then or we could prepare more animals with these abilities, then that actually offers a better use of rangeland in the long term. So this is just one resource. If you guys have any other questions or any interest in this behavior activity, you can actually go to the behave.net website and you can look at interactions of behaviors in different species over time. So they have a lot of good resources on this website. All right, that is the end of the grazing behavior lecture.